She is the little princess of the Tang Dynasty in Nanzhan Province, who is loved by countless people. However, she is a sick little girl who has not lived long. An unexpected opportunity kept her away from the mortal world and made her a member of the path of cultivation in his realm. The school is constantly changing, and the path is sharpened. Step by step, it is both painful and joyful, to search for the legendary capital, her immortal fate. Keywords of the novel. Qingdu Xianyuan no pop-ups, Qingdu Xianyuan TXT complete collection download, Qingdu Xianyuan latest chapter reading. Chapter 1 Preface. Overseas immortal mountains and splendid daming palace. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1 Preface. Overseas immortal mountains and splendid daming palace, the water in the river flows eastward, and the daughter of Luoyang is named Mo-Cho. Mo-Cho can weave silk 13 times, and gather mulberry leaves 14 times in the south. What is the hope for wealth and prosperity in life? I wish I didn't marry the king of the eastern family. In Chang'an City, Daming Palace, it was a summer afternoon when the sound of young palace maids reading loudly came from the water pavilion by the Taihe pool. The lines of poetry are filled with happiness and beauty, and the voices of the young girls are gentle and joyful. The palace guards who pass by along the way can't help but show a faint smile on their faces, diluting the annoyance caused by the noisy cicadas on the tall trees. The palace city is surrounded by numerous palaces and sparse flowers and trees. In July, the sun is bright and scorching, and the heat is scorching. However, the area around the water pavilion is covered with ancient trees and trees, with deep and green branches stretching out like giant umbrellas, creating a cool world. In addition, there are clear waves and ripples outside the water pavilion, and nearly half of the Taihe pool is covered with lotus flowers. The green leaves are high and low, and the fields are clear and round. In the green lotus leaves, pink and white lotus flowers can sometimes be seen supporting the wind and reflecting the sun, like a beautiful woman with strict makeup shining on the water, exceptionally bright. The young palace maids in the water pavilion have completed today's homework, and the female master who is waiting to teach has left the classroom. She has also stood up to tidy up her desk, and left in groups of 3 or 2 with her companions. A round-faced palace maid, aged 11 or 12, sat by the window, holding her chubby face and staring blankly at a pink lotus arrow by the window. A slightly older palace maid with a long face came over and lightly tapped her head in a double bun, saying, "Picking pearls, why are you so foolish? Are you thinking of lotus leaf cake?" Several young palace maids who had not yet left covered their mouths and laughed together. A palace maid in a pink dress followed suit and said, "That must be it. Kaiju is a girl we all know. What she can think of is either lotus leaf cake or sugar lotus seeds. Is it possible that she has grown up and become a female scholar?" After speaking, there was laughter again, and it was undeniable that the image of this little round-faced palace maid, who always yearns for food, has deeply penetrated people's hearts. The little palace maid, who was picking pearls, twisted her head and answered seriously, "I was thinking Mo-Cho, the daughter of Luoyang, has everything she needs. Since she has no aspirations for wealth and prosperity in life, why does she still hate not to marry the Eastern king?" The woman in the pink shirt was greatly surprised and said, "Oh. This is really a long learning journey. We didn't just eat those good foods for free when picking pearls. Do you know we've learned to think?" Kaiju didn't notice the teasing tone from others at all, but remained in her own thoughts and said, "Is this just like the old man often said, things are difficult to complete in the world? This beautiful world, no matter how rich and prosperous, has its shortcomings. Sisters say, can there really be those who are rich and complete in this world?" The woman in the pink shirt said with a natural expression, "Of course there is. Isn't our empress a person of complete wealth and status? Our Tang Dynasty is magnificent and prosperous, with unparalleled status. Except for the emperor, the empress holds the highest status and presents everything to her. What can be imagined is that everything is complete and there are no more regrets. This is the true hope for wealth and status in life. The young palace maids nodded one after another upon hearing the words, their round faces picking pearls, but interjected, not all of them are perfect. The empress still needs a little princess. A few little girls nodded along like pounding garlic. Yeah. Yeah. I heard the empress sigh with the emperor the day before yesterday. I think it was during the incense burning that I begged for trouble, and 3 troublemakers came in. Now, I wonder if it's still useful to ask the immortal again. How good it would be to let the lotus in this pond transform into a fairy daughter. I heard it too, and I even helped the empress bow to the lotus pond. Ah, why is it so difficult for the empress to want a little princess? The elderly palace maid with a long face was slightly stunned, and then reached out to pat the buns. The empress is kind-hearted and has specially opened this palace girls' school to help you understand characters and literature. The purpose is to let you understand books and reason, but it is not to give you the idea of arranging the heavenly family. Her face darkened slightly. The term princess was indeed a sad thing for the emperor and empress. These little girls were still young when they entered the palace and didn't know much about it. Don't make taboos on your tongue. At that time, she was not strict in her discipline and was afraid that these little girls would suffer. After thinking for a moment, she sternly warned. I heard from the steward's aunt that the deposed emperor of the previous dynasty had a violent temperament, and the palace workers worked hard. They were careful every day, but they ended up in trouble. Today, I am lenient with my empress, and even breaking a bowl or dish is not a big deal. Even if you are like me, you are better off. You have time to chew your teeth. Do you know that the most important thing in this palace is not to talk too much? It seems that I have done less work in my daily life. Later, I will tell my aunties to let you sweep more times a day. She walked towards the door one by one, picked up the curtain, and then turned back, saying, "Don't keep up soon. There's been a shortage of people in front of the empress these past few days. Kaiju, you girl. Sister Hanju, Sister Hanju." Kaiju had a pitiful expression on her face, and she kept smiling and bowing with her chubby hands. These little palace maids have been wearing pearl belts since childhood, and they all wear pearl tubes. This sister really shouts sincerely. Han Zhuyan does indeed have the demeanor of a senior sister, but her heart is also soft and biased. She raised all the flesh on this little girl's body. Looking at Saiju's pleasing little figure, although she snorted with great momentum, she couldn't bear to say, "I won't give you lotus leaf cake again." She tried her best to glare fiercely at the little girl and left immediately. Kaiju stretched out her tongue and smiled happily. She knew that as long as the rules were good on the face, Sister Hanju would not punish her. From the mother down, everyone took great care of their group of little palace daughters. A few young palace maids covered their mouths and chuckled, following behind Hanju in line, whispering softly as they walked towards the nearby Mingguang Hall. In the Mingguang Hall, the curtain of soft smoke is gently rolled up, and the golden beast Boshan incense burner still emits thin wisps of smoke, emitting a light and distant aroma of dragon saliva. Under the curtain, someone took a nap and woke up, dressed lightly, holding a book and sitting by the window. It was the hostess of this heavy palace, the Empress Wendy of the Tang Dynasty. Empress Wendy and the current Prince of Xianyuan have been married for more than 20 years, working together with one heart, respecting and supporting each other. Since the end of the previous dynasty, she has gathered uprisings, driven out tyrants, pacified wolves and smoke, saved all people from fire and water, and ultimately achieved great success. At that time, the world had been peaceful for more than 10 years, and the sea was prosperous and stable. The former and later palaces were clear and peaceful. The empress is beautiful and virtuous, the emperor is respectful and loving, and she has 3 sons under her knee, all intelligent and filial. Anyone who sees her will say, "Truly, life has few regrets." A gentle breeze passed through the hall, causing the iron horses under the eaves to tinkle softly, bringing the water and lotus fragrance from the Taiha pool. It was refreshing and pleasant, and several palace maids couldn't help but take a deep breath, their faces even more relaxed. At the end of the path under the shade of willow trees, the little palace maids rushed in, their steps light and steady, their clothes fluttering gently in the wind, and their light pink skirts and shirts clustered together like flowers relaxing. The quality of literature lies in its beauty. Words have a heart, in their truth. I hope to move people with beautiful and sincere words, and I hope everyone likes the story I'm telling. Let's listen to the author Jun's narration, growing up slowly with the female protagonist. One from Xiaoyan's Song of Water in the River, during the Northern and Southern dynasties. Quoting ancient poetry and literature in this article will explain the source. If there is any unmarked source, it is the author's own writing. There will be some poetic texts that conform to the ancient costume fairy tale setting later, because I do think there are some mnemonics, singing, and so on, which are not suitable for using vernacular language, so it needs to be more refined. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. The Mysterious Tale of the Fairy. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. The Mysterious Tale of the Fairy in the Mingguang Palace. A blue-clad palace maid who had just rolled up the curtain with a silver hook heard the faint laughter coming from afar. She couldn't help but take a few more glances outside, and when she turned around, she saw that the Empress also had a hint of smile on her face, indicating that she was in a good mood. The rolling curtain maid was tidying the tassels on the shrimp whiskers, while saying, "The Empress is so kind, and these little girls are going to heaven." Today, the palace school should have broken up, and this meeting was just coming, and she didn't know how to keep quiet. If she hadn't watched them sweep, she would have punished them not to eat dim sum in the afternoon. Another palace maid who came with a tea tray also wore a blue shirt. She was just like a sister's with the rolling curtain palace maid. She said with a smile, "Our aunt-in-law is very powerful. When we talk about these little girls, we almost lose their hope for a day." In-law gave the tea palace maid a displeased look and took the tea, gently placing it on the table in front of Empress Wendy. "When we first went to the palace to learn the rules from the ants, how dare we walk like this with a joke? Even if we don't beat you or punish you, we have to hold our breath all day long, and if we breathe more, we are afraid of rushing to the top. Not to mention dim sum. These little girls can't survive a day when we were in school." The palace maid who brought tea followed behind In-law and deftly presented 2 plates of fresh fruits. She held the tea plate and stood beside Empress Wendy, slowly speaking. After the war, the Empress took in these orphan girls and brought them into the palace to settle down. She pitied them for not having any parents or brothers, and since then, she has been caring for them with good clothes and food, just like her own daughter. "We have been trained in the palace since childhood, and those old ladies are all old people left over from the previous dynasty, with different rules. Moreover, the emperor and empress usually treat us with kindness. It's not that I meant to flatter you. As a wise and compassionate emperor and empress like Tang Dynasty, not only throughout the dynasties, but also throughout the entire southern Jianbu continent, there is no such good heavenly family." In-law made an exaggerated expression of surprise and said, "Oh, our Aunt In Sheng is really amazing. We all look forward to the entire southern Zhan tribe. It's not in vain that the Empress Dowager sent you to Honglu Temple as a female official for 2 years." In Sheng saw Empress Wendy only smiling slightly as she listened to them teasing each other, intending to make fun of each other. She slightly raised her chin towards In-law, with a proud and reserved expression on her face. Following In-Lan's words, she continued. "Not only the southern Jianbu continent, but I've talked about it from a young age. I also know that even in the overseas Xinyo Hezhou and Dongxing Shenzhou, there are rarely such wise and benevolent lords. An old man from Honglu Temple, when he was young, wandered across the sea to search for immortals and asked, 'I have been to Xinyo Hezhou before. Although the search for immortals was not successful, I have also traveled to many countries and seen many customs.' That's what he told me." The atmosphere of the Tang Dynasty was quite open-minded, unlike the previous dynasty's restraint on women in deep boudoirs. Moreover, the emperor and empress felt that there were also talented and decent women among them, so they ordered the establishment of women's schools. They also selected talented individuals from officials, women's families, and palace maids to serve as clerks in various departments and halls. This palace maid named Yinsheng, whose father and brother had been engaged in business overseas and had learned many foreign languages since childhood, served as the temple magistrate for 2 years when Honglu Temple was short of people after the establishment of the new dynasty. She had gained a lot of knowledge from overseas foreign countries. The 2 palace maids inside the palace chatted and teased, while the little palace maids outside the palace got closer and closer. Empress Wendy looked at the small flower-like faces approaching and felt a sense of joy in her heart. She couldn't help but ask, Silver Sheng, has that old man seen any immortals overseas? I wonder if immortals can really fulfill the requests of mortals. Yinsheng bent his knees slightly and replied, Madam Hui, I once heard this old man say that there is a legend of Penglai Immortal Mountain overseas. He once saw hidden mountains and towers in the waves, with flying immortals appearing and shining, making people yearn for it. Unfortunately, when the ship approached, there was nothing to see. Perhaps there were also immortals, but she didn't want to see more mortals. This last sentence was her own guess. Empress Wendy sighed slightly, but the 2 of them, Yinlan and Yinsheng, knew that this empress had been seeking a daughter for many years. They had just wanted to persuade her, Empress, you treat these little palace maids so well and have accumulated so much virtue. Sooner or later, you will feel that God has bestowed a little princess on you. Someone exclaimed urgently, Empress. A small palace maid in a pink dress walked quickly into the entrance of the palace. It was the round-faced pearl picker with an uncontrollable expression of joy on her face. Although Kaiju was in a hurry, she still bowed in a proper manner, stood up, and before her clothes were fastened, she hurriedly spoke again, Madam. Madam, I just saw it by the Taihe pool. Your favorite lotus flower has grown into a lotus pod today. Would you like to go and take a look? But seriously. She has always been dignified like Empress Wendy, and when she heard the phrase, picking pearls, she couldn't help but show a hint of surprise. The location of Daming Palace was originally Longshuiyuan. Since the establishment of the Tang Dynasty, due to the deep and moist royal atmosphere in this area, during the construction of the palace city, a clear spring suddenly emerged underground. The water quality was refreshing, especially sweet, and the source was endless. Craftsmen used this spring as the source and dug a pool of Taihe liquor. The lush vegetation around the pond far surpasses that of the previous dynasty, and the lotus flowers in the pond are particularly beautiful. In the midsummer season, the waves shimmer and the lotus flowers are draped over the palace. The hair is beautiful and proud, washing the clear ripples into a pavilion, making it the first place to enjoy music in the palace. In recent years, during the summer heat, there has always been a colorful and delicate lotus in the pond, which is different from ordinary plants. Other lotus flowers, whether pink or white, are simply compared to mediocre and vulgar powder. What's even more peculiar is that this flower hides even after summer, without bearing lotus seeds or lotus stems, and its roots are nowhere to be found. Even though this flower has caught the attention of many people, it has never been known when it will bloom or when it will wither. Only the following summer, I saw her beautifully standing on the emerald green canopy. Empress Wendy is not naturally extravagant, but she loves to grow flowers and grass, often personally taking care of the vegetation around the Mingguang Hall. She particularly loves this lotus flower. After owning this colorful red lotus, she often moves to the water pavilion by the Taihe pool in her leisure time to appreciate the lingering beauty. Her love is hard to find. When the flowers bloomed, I couldn't bear to pick them lightly, so I marked the direction with the palace officials, intending to wait for autumn to harvest their lotus seeds and cultivate them, but it was always difficult to find them. After years of such hard work and effort, I can only sigh for the emotional and unintentional nature, gradually fading the focus on cultivation. This year, the flowering period of this flower is particularly long. Since its appearance in June, it has been unbeaten and not withered. It is fair and graceful, with a rosy and delicate appearance, breaking away from the dust and shining brightly. Even the scorching sun is surpassed by her. Every time the palace people pass by, they can't help but take a few more glances. I heard today that this flower actually bears a lotus seed. Isn't it an unexpected joy? The silver, blue, and silver sheng on both sides knew the empress's intentions. Seeing that the sun outside had already passed its fiercest hour, they quickly helped the empress up and ordered someone to bring a yellow umbrella. The group headed towards the Tay pool. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Jiaoyan Dreams. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Jiaoyan Dreams. But it was said that Empress Wendy was surprised and delighted when she heard the little palace maid picking pearls to report that the colorful lotus flower had grown lotus pods. With the support of everyone, she came towards the Tay pool. Arriving at the edge of the pond, I saw the lotus flowers that were still in flames yesterday. Today, all the red clothes have fallen, and the green stems and pavilions are still there. However, a small and exquisite lotus pod has grown on the branch. The surrounding lotus flowers are still in their flowering period, making this small lotus pod particularly fresh and lovely. Kaiju let out a hey sound, carefully staring at the lotus seed, and said strangely, when I just arrived, it seemed like the lotus seed was just the size of a green apricot. Everyone looked again, and although the lotus seed was not as big as the regular one, it was very green and full, clearly showing that the lotus seed had already grown into shape. Empress Wendy sat at the nearby water pavilion and ordered the pearl picker and another palace attendant to take a small boat to look nearby. She reported that the lotus seeds had indeed grown, so she instructed the pearl picker to carefully pick them down. Kaiju held Xiaoyan Peng in her arms like a precious treasure, jumped off the boat and offered it to the empress. She smelled a refreshing fragrance and couldn't help but drool. The empress looked around and couldn't help blushing. She said to herself, "It's really embarrassing. I've been in the palace for many years, and I've never seen any precious delicacies before. Today, I'm so greedy." She thought to herself, but couldn't help but gently split open the small lotus seed in her hand. However, she saw that there was only a jade bead-like lotus seed hidden quietly in the lotus room, exquisite and moist, not ordinary. Everyone exclaimed in amazement. Kaiju thought to herself, such a beautiful lotus seed must be sweet and clear. However, she advised the empress, "Madam, please taste this lotus seed and it must be extraordinary." A pair of smooth eyes on Kaiju's small face aimed at the lotus seed, then looked up at the empress, with a hopeful expression on her face, as if the empress could taste it even after eating her. Empress Wendy smiled slightly, picked up the lotus seed, and looked at it carefully in the sunlight. The lotus seed was surrounded by a green and colorful halo, clear and warm, very tempting. She couldn't help but tear open the outer skin of the lotus seed, revealing the white, tender, and pink flesh inside. The fragrance was even stronger, making it heart-wrenching. In the eager gaze of the pearl picker, the queen obediently took the lotus seed into her mouth and closed her eyes to savor it carefully. The two palace maids, however, were a bit nervous and glared at Kaiju, saying, "Little girl, you don't know how to handle things. You can let Empress eat anything you like. Lotus seeds are tender and free from impurities." With a gentle sip at the mouth, they turn into a slightly sweet liquid, refreshing and refreshing. Empress Wendy breathed a sigh of satisfaction and waved her hand to the two palace maids, saying, "Don't blame her, it's because the palace itself likes her so much." The queen waved to the nervous pearl picking again, gesturing for the little palace maid to approach and pat her restless hands, which were twisted tightly in her clothes. "Good child, thank you for being so attentive. Otherwise, this lotus will come and go without a trace, and no one will find it. If it weren't for your opportunity, I wouldn't have known if I could have seen this flower again, let alone this lotus seed." The words made Kaiju happy, and the little girl's obvious emotional change made the Empress couldn't help but laugh. The crowd breathed a sigh of relief when they saw that the Empress was indeed in a very happy and comfortable mood. Empress Wendy turned her head to look at the large palace maids next to her and said, "Silver Blue, choose what they like, and give them more rewards." Pearl Picking and the small palace maids thanked her in unison, but Empress Wendy returned to the Mingguang Hall without mentioning it. Not to mention how the lotus stems and leaves disappeared after the lotus seeds were harvested, which amazed everyone. Not to mention that the pearl-picking maid had also obtained many lotus leaf cakes and sugar lotus seeds. She had been smiling and smiling for many days, but only that Empress Wendy had eaten the lotus seed and had a dreamy night. When she woke up, she said she didn't invite any adventures in her dream, only remembered the fragrance of flowers filling her body. From that day on, I gradually felt mentally tired and physically weak. The emperor was worried and ordered the imperial hospital to queue up to carefully cut the pulse table, but everyone was happy with their colors, saying that it was the mother who was happy and the pearl was in her arms. For a moment, both inside and outside the palace, incense was burned to celebrate and pray for the empress. It turned out that during the War of the Past, Empress Wendy, in order to protect her seriously injured husband, disregarded her already in her 60s and resolutely urged her horse to lead the enemy. Although reinforcements arrived in time, she unfortunately had a miscarriage and lost a formed daughter. Both the couple were heartbroken. After that, although the empress sought the care of renowned doctors from all over the world, she was unable to conceive again. Although the emperor has already grown 3 intelligent sons under his knee, he is extremely eager for heaven to give him another delicate and soft little daughter to make up for his past regrets. Both the emperor and empress were overjoyed. Be careful everywhere, eagerly anticipating. Sure enough, after October, in early May of the following year, when the first lotus arrow of the Taihe pool first bloomed, the queen successfully gave birth to a little princess carved in powder and jade. It's not just about closing the palace, but also about everyone inside and outside the court being full of joy. They all believe that it's the good fortune accumulated by the empress. As expected, the immortal rewarded her with blessings and finally fulfilled her wish. Despite inheriting many hopes and legends, the little princess was born weak and plagued with illnesses every day. The empress was both compassionate and heartbroken. The emperor first granted amnesty to the world, then forbade selection. After careful consideration, he named his youngest daughter Mingda, with the small character CZ, hoping that the princess could be as healthy and easy to care for as a rhinoceros. She also bestowed the title of princess on the land of Jinyang where the uprising took place in the past, hoping that the blessings of this prosperous land could extend on her daughter and bless her with health and longevity. The queen remembered that it was the lotus seed picked by Kaiju that gave birth to Xiaojiao, indicating that this little palace maid was indeed the lucky star her daughter had hit. She ordered Kaiju to serve the princess closely. I also feel that the names Mingda and Jinyang are both big and broad, and I am afraid that being too wealthy and tough may actually compromise my fortune. Moreover, it is more appropriate for my daughter's family to have a more delicate name. Upon reflection, it seems that Zhao had a connection with the exotic lotus flowers in the Tay Pond before and after her birth, so she gave her nickname Yotsu and was only called among her close relatives in the palace. It can be seen that even if you are an emperor, your love for your daughter is no different from that of ordinary people. Unfortunately, even if you are an emperor, you cannot win much blessings for your loved ones. This little princess is cherished by countless people, and both parents and brothers regard her as precious as a treasure. Although Empress Wendy had a daughter in her middle age and fulfilled her wish, she had no choice but to give birth during the war in her early years, causing harm to the root cause. After the world was at peace, she dared not slack off and kept the harem clean and tidy, which greatly consumed her mental and hard work. Within 2 years after giving birth, she fell ill and fell ill. Princess Cixi was just over 3 years old, and the empress let go. Even though she was reluctant to part ways before passing away, she could only leave her youngest daughter as the one who lost her trust in her childhood. In the palace, the empress has always been kind and compassionate, causing everyone to mourn and mourn. Both the court and the public mourned and mourned. The emperor cried uncontrollably, vowing not to establish a central palace anymore. He devoted all his remaining love to his youngest daughter and left her to be raised by his own side. In addition, the young princess was intelligent and reasonable from a young age, so the emperor cherished her more deeply than his 3 brothers. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Who has a good story? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Who has a good story? Time flies. Empress Wendy has been away for 2 years, and Princess Xiaoxizi is almost 5 years old. The round-faced little palace maid who used to pick pearls has grown into a highly fortunate palace maid in charge. Kaiju deeply felt the kindness of Empress Wendy back then, and also realized that she had a deep connection with the little princess. She came from the side of the little princess, cared about everything, and showed utmost love. She usually secretly seeks advice from the grand hospital and the elderly women in the palace, who have many experiences in educating and promoting children's health. She is even proficient in guiding techniques for physical fitness and performing 5 animal games, hoping that when the little princess is happy, she can learn 1 or 2 moves with her. Being even a little stronger is also good. Princess Cixi knows that Kaiju truly loves her and is also deeply attached to her aunt who loves both Cixi and delicious food. Kaiju laments that the princess was born weak and suffered from loss, and she doesn't know how much she has secretly broken her heart. However, even though the emperor cherishes and the attendants are attentive, the pearl-picking even hates to have to sleep tirelessly to take care of the princess, which ultimately cannot make her body healthy. The little princess named CZ is not as robust as a rhinoceros, but in fact, she is as thin and weak as a lotus stem after autumn, and often suffers from illnesses, which really makes people around her worried. I won't be discussing the affairs of the Daming Palace for now, but will come and see the people on the streets of Chang'an. Han Er is a famous leisurely person on the streets of Chang'an. Recently, due to spring difficulties, he has only nestled in his own house, basking in the sun and catching lice. The pots and tanks in his home are as clean as water, and the wild sunflower grains under the windowsill have been pulled out to satisfy his hunger. On this day, he pressed his empty belly, and there was nothing to find in the courtyard. Even the mice had not been coming recently, and he couldn't help but feel a bit worried. I haven't thought about finding a way to make money right now, I can't starve to death. He smashed his empty mouth twice, wandered around the smooth room twice, and went to the bottom of the bed to retrieve a jacket that he had changed from a month ago. Cold and warm, this jacket no longer needs to be worn. Watching the collar of the jacket adorned with 2 pieces of good sheepskin, Han Er nodded with satisfaction. After all, there is still some family background. So he lifted the jacket on his shoulder, swayed his arms, and prepared to pawn it at the pawn shop, so that he could exchange it for 2 coins. Arriving at the entrance of the alley, I saw Li Sanchi, who was usually familiar with him, happily holding a bamboo tube and hanging a dried lotus leaf bag with oil stains on his arm. He swayed and occasionally leaned his mouth towards the mouth of the bamboo tube to take a few sips, with a wet and shiny water mark hanging from the corner of his mouth. Han Erdaki, Li Sanping is not as good as him every day. I'm afraid he doesn't even have a full-sleeved and full-neck jacket. Where did he get this idle money from? Surprisingly, I bought alcohol and food in broad daylight. Is it because there is a new way of making money in the city? How could he not know? Han Er felt even more hungry in his own belly, and couldn't help but approach with a hot eye. Sure enough, he smelled a whiff of alcohol, and now his heart was more like 110 cat paws scratching together. He couldn't help but salivate and ask, Li San-gu, where did you get rich? Li San grinned and wiped the corner of his mouth across his arm on his sleeve, saying in a rare and generous manner. You also go. There's a young master at the Miaoxiang Tower at the entrance of the market who's buying liquor and food. It's been 2 days now, how come you still don't know? It's said that the old mother at home likes talking books and loves the lotus flowers. This young master, in order to be filial, specially bought the Miaoxiang Tower and only collects anecdotes related to the lotus flowers. But if there's something good to say, I'll treat you to wine and meat. If there's something that suits his heart, I'll also reward you with a piece of silver. I squeezed in and told you about Mr. Qin's bowl of lotus flowers blooming in winter, and indeed gave me food and drink. How could you say such a good thing? Use your mouth and you can exchange it for such good food and drink. Qin Lao Ye's bowl lotus blooms in winter. Han Er is also aware of this. The lotus bowl was clearly cultivated in a greenhouse. What's so unusual about blooming in winter? Can we even exchange wine and meat here? Han Er was hit hard in his heart. So the one I know, Li San sprayed a mouthful of wine foam on himself, and Han Er didn't care to wipe his face. He bowed and thanked him, his feet like wheels smearing oil, and went straight to the Miaoxiang Tower. At the entrance of the market, I saw a group of people from afar gathered at the entrance of the Miaoxiang building. A woman was squeezing out, her hands clenched into fists to protect her heart. Immediately, people around her approached. The old woman spread out her palm, and under the sunlight, there was a silver flash in her palm. It was clear that she had received a piece of broken silver, and many people around her could be heard exclaiming loudly from afar. Surprisingly, there is really silver. That is Zhang Pozi from Hohot Hatong, who is dedicated to running around and visiting households. She has always relied on her eloquence to please the women in the later house, selling some oil and silk flowers to make a living. She must have heard of it from some ancient family, and in exchange for this silver, she met the wishes of the ancient people. On both sides of the restaurant and on the street, there were a group of people sitting, either holding their cheeks or scratching their heads, all pondering and pondering. Han Ersheng was afraid that the goods in his stomach would be knocked over first. He quickly tied the obstructing jacket round his waist and rushed forward with even tighter steps, rushing out of the crowd. His arms pulled hard and he used all his strength to dig a crack in the dense and airtight crowd, burying his head and squeezing towards the door. I saw a long table on the inside of the door, with bamboo tubes and lotus leaf buns piled up on most of the table. Tempting aromas emanated. There was indeed wine and meat. Li San is truly sincere. Dozens of tables and chairs that were usually scattered in the lobby were pushed aside, except for a desk and a bench in the center of the hall. Wang Wuzheng from Qianjia finished the story of Lotus Fairy helping the struggling scholar, and just got up from the bench, bowing his hand to thank a young man in green after the desk. Wang Wu stuttered a bit when speaking, and he had to make 3 or 4 cuts in one sentence. It's rare that the young master was really good at cultivation. Han Er smiled and thanked him slightly, thinking to himself. Wang Wu took a bamboo tube and a dried lotus leaf bag from the second-hand shop in front of the long table, and walked out happily with his head raised. Han Er's eyes were eager and itchy, but he didn't pay attention to the few familiar idle men behind Wang Wu. He took 2 steps to rush to the desk, opened his arm to protect the chair, and took advantage of the people behind him being stunned, his buttocks tilted and squeezed, and he quickly sat down. After sitting down, he gave a hand to the person behind him. A few brothers, it's urgent. Please accept. I'll invite my brothers to drink later. Without looking at the darkened faces of those idle men, Han Er quickly turned his head and apologized to the young master. Young master, there is a story about the Lotus Fairy descending to earth in my room. Not many people know about it, and even if others have heard about it, I don't know much about it. I have come to share it with the young master. That young master looked in his early 20s, handsome, dressed in green clothes. He was not as fair, tender, and weak as a typical young master in an academy. His eyes were particularly bright and lively, but he appeared extremely calm despite his young age. Unfortunately, it was probably because I had been studying hard in the cold window, with a slight vertical line on my eyebrows and a few strands of frost on my temples. He smiled and nodded at Han Er, his dark eyebrows relaxed and he suddenly felt a little less solemn. His face was full of warmth, truly making him feel like a spring breeze. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. But searching for the fragrance of lotus flowers. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. But searching for the fragrance of lotus flowers. But when Han Erwin heard that someone in Miaoxiang Tower was spending money to buy antiques, he couldn't help but drool and rush towards him in a panic. As expected, he saw a young master in green clothes, who was gentle and peaceful. Han Er whispered to himself, "This young master is such a talented person." He swallowed his saliva and was about to speak. The young master raised his hand to stop him. Although he still smiled, he was a bit more serious. "Brother, when you were in the future, I had already made a request to everyone. I have a statement in advance. Although I am collecting strange news and anecdotes for my mother, she likes to investigate thoroughly. It is important to clarify where these strange stories come from and who they are related to. Only by being able to trace the root cause in the community can we do so. Therefore, I will not accept those fabricated and unfounded stories." The young master's voice was clear, his gaze was clear, and his face was gentle. Although he had no intention of forcing others, he looked solemn upon a sweep. Han Er felt a chill in his heart, but he couldn't even think of lying. Fortunately, Han Er did indeed have a strange news in his heart, and how many words he was eager to pour out at this moment. There are shadows, not just shadows. This is a real thing. My aunt is an old palace maid released from the palace, and this is something she has witnessed with her own eyes. Although there are rumors both inside and outside Chang'an, they have spread widely. My aunt only cares about me and only told me in detail after coming out. The young master nodded, seeming to be very interested. Han Er became enthusiastic and continued to speak a long sentence. This Chang'an city, everyone in this world knows that the Empress Wendy of the current emperor is one of the few who is generous and kind in history. How many years did that colorful lotus flower take to bear a jade lotus pod, and surprisingly, only a pearl-like lotus seed was born inside this pod. Empress Wendy became pregnant after eating the lotus seed. 10 months later, she gave birth to a delicate little princess. At that time, it was a heavenly fragrance, with red light filling the room and fairy music in the air. It can be seen that this princess was originally the incarnation of the Lotus Fairy. She was moved by the kindness of the Empress Dowager and came down to earth to fulfill her wish. Han Er was afraid that his story might not be detailed or comprehensive enough, and his mouth froze wildly. He searched every corner of his head, adding 7 or 8 points of magic to an already peculiar story. The young master's expression froze when he heard the words, "lotus of different colors," and he couldn't help but clench his hands in front of him when he heard about things like lotus seed and giving birth to a daughter. Han Er only praised the appearance and conduct of the lotus seed princess who was about to turn 5, but he didn't know how to reveal more strange things. If he wanted to speak again, but there was really no more stock left. If he didn't speak, he would be unwilling and open his mouth again and again. Just as he was about to squeeze out a few more words, the young master raised his hand and Han Er couldn't help but stop. The young master in green's smile warmed a bit. This big brother said very well. Looking at the small brocade pouch that the young master gently placed, Han Er dared not reach out to retrieve it. It was clearly not just a piece of broken silver, it looked heavy. How many big meals should there be? Oh, Han Er is afraid that the young master may have taken it by mistake. Don't just have an empty celebration. Although Han Er's eyes were like hooks that couldn't lift the brocade pouch, they remained motionless like clay sculptures. He has been living in Chang'an City for more than 30 years, and he is not brainless. How could he believe that he could really make such a big fortune by using his mouth? Moreover, these young masters of the academy are not easily offended. If someone reneges or turns their back, it's not just because they can't get the money. Don't let the officials get into trouble. The young master in green did not show any intention of retracting, and with a gentle gesture, the brocade pouch path fell directly into Han Er's arms, leaving Han Er completely stunned. The young master in green said warmly, "Big brother, don't be polite. I should also thank you for speaking so ancient. This strange news must be very kind to my family. It's just a matter of heart. If you can't thank me, I'll buy you a cup of tea to moisten your throat." Han Erfang covered his chest and abdomen in a daze, and the silver that fell there burned and made him feel flustered. The young master in green stood up tall and arched his hand at the crowded group of people at the door. "Thank you all for your kindness. I have received many strange stories these past few days, which should have fulfilled my mother's wishes. I bid farewell to you. You can take all the wine and food, so I would like to express my gratitude for bothering everyone these past few days." After speaking, with a flick of his sleeve, he walked out. There were still many people gathered around the door, but for some reason, he didn't see anyone squeezing in. He just walked out of the crowd with a carefree and relaxed demeanor. The crowd didn't care about their surprise and rushed to the table to drink and eat. The waiter shouted loudly, but couldn't help but be overwhelmed by the crowd and disorderly footsteps. For a moment, bamboo tubes were rolling everywhere. There were people chasing bamboo tubes and grabbing lotus leaf bags in the lobby. "You stepped on my hand, and I grabbed your foot." The whole room was laughing and cursing. For example, I don't know how much fun it was. After discussing the street affairs in Chang'an, let's take a look at the people in Daming Palace. In the palace city, the edge of the Taihe Lake in April is already lush with greenery, and the drooping branches of several late peaches shine low on the water, with red petals falling everywhere. Although lotus flowers have not yet bloomed on the water surface, the newly emerged lotus leaves are tall and low, either soft or curly, a tender green that is already worth enjoying. The water pavilion by the pond is surrounded by lotus winds on all sides, but the little princess CZ is filled with tears. How many times did she hear Aunt Kaiju talk about the lotus flowers in Tay Pond? During the season of lotus leaves and fields, Tay Pond is her favorite place to come. Although there is no longer the colorful red lotus that used to be, with its green cover and red clothes, the green room is still filled with clear and beautiful scenery. When the wind rises, watching the swaying of the green leaves, the pink lotus will sparkle with the smiling faces of the little palace maids picking lotus flowers. When it rains, listening to the tinkling of raindrops, the melodious sound is even more pleasant than the plucking of the jiawei qin, the beloved instrument of the emperor. In the morning, there are round and clear lotus leaves floating around on the large and round lotus leaves, like sparkling pearls rolling on a jade plate. When the leaves tilt, the pearls in the plate swoop and slide into the water, sometimes startling a small red fish. Come around noon, Aunt Kaiju will pick a lotus leaf as a small umbrella for her, with a refreshing fragrance and a slight coolness every time she arrived at this water pavilion. The little princess would linger. Recently, perhaps she has been getting older and gradually getting to know things. Princess Tsitsi often asks Kaiju about her mother's affairs. Today at the water pavilion, she remembered that her mother used to stop here often. Even at a young age, she couldn't help but admire and feel sad. Kaiju accompanied Haosheng for a while to comfort her, but when she saw the little princess crying and feeling tired, she hugged the bed and gently patted and comforted her, singing some gentle songs. The little princess gradually became drowsy, and at a young age, she couldn't resist walking half a circle around the Taiyi pool. She cried for a while, feeling tired and gradually sinking her nose. Kaiju saw the little princess sleeping soundly, gently covering her thin quilt and sighing slightly. If the palace maid saw her and allowed the little princess to sleep in the water pavilion during the day, she would have to blame her a few words. But, to put it bluntly, I don't know if the princess's body can enjoy her life. It's better to let her mind do as long as she doesn't hurt her body and can relax and be free for a few days. Where isn't sleeping? Besides, Your Majesty has also said that everything can make the little princess feel comfortable. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Seems to have old friends coming. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Chapter 6 seems to have old friends coming. Kaiju waited for the little princess to fall asleep, lightly covering the window and lowering the thick curtain. She walked out of the water pavilion and saw the warm sun and gentle breeze outside. She gestured for the two young palace maids to carefully guard the pavilion and head towards the small boat tied by the Taiha pool. Just now she saw that the new lotus leaf of this year was growing very well. She thought that she might as well take advantage of this space to pick some pieces to make a lotus leaf cake. When the little princess woke up, it was time to use dim sum. The newly arrived lotus leaves are fragrant and pleasant, paired with warm and nourishing poria cocos powder and jujube paste. Perhaps the little princess can eat a few more pieces. When it comes to eating, Kaiju reminds me of my hometown. Taro, which has leaves like lotus leaves, is also called chu. It is sticky, fragrant, and soft, and is more nourishing. When the little princess was given her nickname, Kaiju felt amused for a moment and couldn't help but say the earthly meaning of chu. After saying it, she regretted it before Aunt Inlan's eyes turned sideways. The lotus fairy, who has emerged from the dust and waves, can't compare it to the taro grown in the mud. The Empress Dowager, however, did not blame her for being reckless and talkative at all. Instead, she breathed a sigh of relief and said, "It's not common among the people to say that a lowly name is easy to raise. My young lotus is raised like a taro. If we ask for kindness, we can better support it." The people who were serving around praised each other, and Kaiju genuinely felt that if the immortal lotus in the Te pool could be stained with the earthy flavor of mud taro, perhaps it could really be nurtured well. However, the little princess was so pampered that she couldn't have the half-strength of taro. Now, she is still like a skinny little leaf in a pond, lonely and heartbreaking. When I think about it, the heart of pearl picking is tightly clenched. The water pavilion is surrounded by green arches, and the gentle breeze moves the curtains. The fragrance of lotus seems to be absent, and there are several soft whispers of yellow warblers in the shade of willows. On the embroidered bed inside the water pavilion, the little princess was sleeping soundly, with a glimmer of water on her eyelashes. Wuda, there was a slight ripple of air flow indoors, which disappeared like rain and smoke for a moment. After a very faint blue light and smoke dissipated, a person suddenly appeared beside the couch, who was the young master in green clothes who spent money on buying antiques in Chang'an City. In the eyes of ordinary people, there is naturally only a sleeping little girl indoors, but he can see that there is still a familiar phantom in the spirit of this girl. The young master in green stared at the phantom for a while, let out a sigh, and had a spell on his hand. He was about to shoot it out when he saw a light shining on the little princess's head. A woman in red floats down in Guanhua village, with a youthful age and unparalleled beauty. The two faced each other face to face, each speechless for a moment. After a while, the young master in green finally spoke up and said, "This Chang'an city of the Tang Dynasty is truly one of the few bustling and beautiful places in the southern part of the continent. This young master is so cool and elegant in Chang'an City. He is such a handsome person, not only with a beautiful heart and mouth, but also with a calm and composed demeanor." Unexpectedly, when I spoke, my demeanor was completely lost. I didn't know how to chat and didn't ask for safety. However, such a brainless sentence came. After saying this, if I choked, my voice would stop. The beauty in red looked as if she was happy or sad, inexplicably difficult to argue. When he was nearby, she already felt something, and when he came from his current background, she knew there was no need to hide. Although she had lost her former powers, she still had a faint sense that she knew he would appear in front of her one day. The old story has been separated for many years, and the old friend has crossed many mountains and seas to meet him. After so many years of sorrow, joy, and enmity, they flow through their hearts in an instant. I wonder if he is here to pursue his old love, or to seek revenge. After years of suffering, she had also imagined how she would respond to him if we met again. But I didn't expect that when I actually met, all the words I had anticipated to respond would come to nothing, let alone that he would start like this. She felt a pang in her heart and whispered, "Brother Stone, you finally came here. After all these years, you still can't speak like this." Her voice choked up. "I couldn't resist you back then. Are you going to destroy my divine soul to avenge your sect? I didn't really want to survive that day, nor did I deliberately hide here. You, just do it yourself." At the end, the sound became increasingly low and almost imperceptible. The young master in green felt a deep pain in his heart, and his throat was stagnant as if he had swallowed a roasted grass seed. He didn't know how to answer the question. He closed his eyes and struggled to speak again. "Danfu, there's no need to distinguish between various causes and effects back then. I, Ling Ling, was also at fault. How could it all be blamed on you? I came to find you, but I'm just not at ease." Danfu's tears rolled down her face, and her heart was as sweet and bitter as honey-soaked huanglian, with an indescribable taste. She tearfully gazed at the person in front of her who had only been seen for many years, her beloved, and then said in a low voice, "I luckily saved a trace of my divine soul by using the Buddha lotus seed back then, and fell from a gap in space, only to be able to survive here. I attached myself to the Buddha lotus seed, and took a glance at the spring water to rest for many years. Fortunately, there was a slight spiritual energy in the spring eye, and the lotus seed sucked out the spiritual energy from the spring and was able to regenerate. Although it was not as magical as the Buddha lotus seed in the past, it also kept my vitality alive. Coincidentally, the Empress ate the lotus seed and, with the help of her physical strength, gave birth to this daughter. I also took advantage of her pregnancy to repair her divine soul. This original body was born with a transparent spiritual orifice, and I don't know if it has anything to do with that lotus seed. Unfortunately, being born in this realm, any turbid energy can easily lead to premature death. I can also be considered to have the same origin as her in this world. My spirit has always been fostered on her body. Unfortunately, if you don't come, she won't be able to live for a few years." It took Ling Yan many years to find his old friend, regardless of whether he had a grudge or a grudge. In this world, what he cared most about in his life was actually this woman. Just now, I saw that although her spirit was weak, it was no longer the way the candle was swaying and her vitality was about to die. My heart was slightly calm. Listening to her say goodbye, her emotions churned in her heart. Hate it. It seems like there is no hatred anymore, only lamenting that the world is deceiving people. Love. But I cannot restore the charming demeanor of my young children back then. She used to be as precious as gold and jade, but now she is so lonely, with only a trace of her divine soul left. What old grudges do she still hold? I was just a poor boy in the mountains, with a blue eye in my master's school and some luck, blinding the eyes of our predecessors. We have tasted the taste of love in the world. In that disaster, being able to save one's life was also the blessing of the teacher and the people in front of them. For the rest of my life, I am powerless to see the way and have no heart to talk about love or hate anymore. Wherever I can do, I will go where I want to go. Brother Stone, you didn't draw your sword at first sight of me, so I really like it. The mirror tree of the heaven and earth mirror has been destroyed, and it's not easy for you to break through the realm. Are you here just to take a look at me? At first, I only had a slight idea of luck, thinking that if you have Buddha lotus seeds, perhaps you can have a glimmer of vitality. The red silk tie you planted in the past, there is still a piece of it left on me that has not been destroyed. I borrowed all the 4 mirrors of heaven and earth, and found the fallen boundary stone fragments on the broken branches of the mirror tree. I asked Master Tu to help me break through the void and find you. Fortunately, the red thread is still effective, vaguely pointing to this place in the red world. I also heard that there is something unusual about the lotus here, and I really hope it is you. Indeed, it's you. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Pain in Yenner's Heart. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Chapter 7. Pain in Lianer's heart. I hope it's you. Sure enough, it's you. Ling Ting's tone gradually calmed down, and when he said the word, hope, it was natural and there was no awkwardness. One is that he was originally straightforward by nature, and the other is that he truly cared about the woman in front of him. Although he no longer had sweet feelings, it was truly a thought that could not be stopped. So if you have no suitable place to stay, what should you do? Ling Zhizhen was about to say, I'm here to pick you up and go back to the Qingkong realm, but he didn't know how to speak. On the ancient battlefield, even though my master no longer hated her because of her death, he could not shake off the memories that stood between the two like mountains. Moreover, she only has a trace of divine soul left, and once she goes back, there is no place to hide. What should she do if she goes back? Danfu heard a sentence, I really hope it's you, and felt that her wish was fulfilled, with no regrets left. I can still see you like this, Brother Stone. I'm really happy. She had tears in her eyes and a smile on the corner of her mouth. The person in front of her was also the beloved who had once been affectionate. At this moment, her expression was also as sad as happy. How could she not know what he was thinking in his heart? Ling Yan, I won't go back, I can't go back. Danfu shook her head, her tone low and clear yet firm. This princess is destined to die young in this realm. I have used the power of lotus seeds to nourish her divine soul, but she has no solution as her turbid energy fills her spiritual orifices. I have the intention to enter this realm for her reincarnation. I thought the divine soul would inevitably be shattered after being damaged, but when I was recuperating, I found that although the fairy spirit energy in this small thousand realms is weak, there is no vitality. After a few more reincarnations in this realm, perhaps my divine soul can be restored, and I can become immortal peacefully. I will use the power of reincarnation to completely forget the past. Everything in the Qingkong realm has nothing to do with me anymore. I only want the love of my parents, and would rather sink into the mundane world. I just want to be an ordinary person, try love and marriage, even if I have to go through life and death from now on. Her voice gradually became imperceptible, her head drooping, and tears rolled down in streams, causing immense pain in Ling Ling's heart. After pausing for a while, when Danfu looked up again, she had already shed tears and smiled. In this world of red dust, there is a strong sense of turbidity. Although the road is hopeless, it is what I am looking for in my heart. Ling Yan didn't expect her to think so clearly and decisively. She pondered for a moment, but there was no better solution. Moreover, due to her experiences, perhaps staying in this realm, far away from the struggle between the Tao and the demon in the Qingkong realm, even if she were to become immortal, would still be fortunate. Danfu had always been able to make up her mind and follow herself, dealing with many grievances and restraining her temper. After passing through life and death, I finally regained some of my previous bold and decisive views. He fell silent for a moment, unsure whether to comfort or express joy. Suddenly remembering one more thing, it will surely make the person in front of me feel a little relieved. There's one more thing, I'll teach you peace of mind. The child left by your second sister is already under my doorstep. As long as I'm here one day, I'll protect your second sister's bloodline. Danfu's heart was filled with sadness and joy again. What was sad was that the carefree character of second sister had fallen into a state of love just like her. Moreover, hearing Ling Yan's tone, it was likely that she had already fallen. Fortunately, the second sister still left her bones and blood, which was finally pitted by heaven. In those years, their sisters were at the forefront of the battle between Tao and Devil, and how could they survive the many open shots and hidden arrows? She fell to the brink of death, and as expected, second sister couldn't escape. I thanked you on behalf of my second sister. Danfu bowed deeply. Why do you have to thank me? Senior brother Qingji has always been close to me, and besides, she is you. Ling Yi slightly turned his body and said, talking about past events is always difficult to fully express. He paused for a moment and then asked again, you said to represent this princess in reincarnation, but what did she do? She is a natural and transparent body, and staying in this world can only be a premature fate, which is a pity. Her father loves this daughter very much. At this point, Danfu couldn't help but feel choked again as she remembered her father's ruthlessness. Ling Ting knew that she felt something in her heart and also secretly felt pain. After the newly born Buddha lotus seed, there are still several sections of spiritual lotus root left. Just take a portion of her essence and blood from her to reshape her body with this spiritual lotus root. When I use her identity, I also need to establish this causal relationship. I will supplement her with some elemental strength, which will help her fulfill her filial piety for a few years before re-entering this realm according to her destiny. Brother Stone, please help me reshape my body, and then take her to the Qingkong realm. The Qingkong realm has very little turbid energy but abundant spiritual energy, which is in perfect harmony with her. Danfu drifted closer to Ling Yan and said, "She has the grace to nourish the divine soul with me, and I borrowed her essence and blood identity to give her a share of the cultivation affinity." She saw that Ling Yan's temples had blossomed with hair, and although her face was as beautiful as yesterday, it had a hint of wind and frost on it, no longer as bright and pure as before. She couldn't help but reach out her hand and touch her hair, only to realize that she was just a strand of divine soul. How could she touch the real thing? Back in the day, how outstanding was the white stone immortal from Shangqing Mountain. How much hard work should he have been running around these years? Danfu felt a deep sorrow in her heart, her soft pussy trembling slightly, but she still felt empty and stopped on Ling Yan's hair. With the beauty of the past's hair and ears rubbing against each other, there is today's pain of skin cutting and heart dissection. Ling Ting couldn't help but extend his hand. Their hands were one empty and one solid, touching and gripping each other. Although they couldn't truly relive the intimacy of the past, it was a small consolation. This life. It's here. Danfu's heart was sore, and she calmed down for a moment. She was worried about her lover's cultivation and said, "Brother Stone, breaking through boundaries will consume a lot of energy and hinder her cultivation for decades." Just now, when she saw her beloved who had been separated for 100 years, she was so excited that her mind wandered. She didn't even pay attention to his cultivation status. Looking at it again, it was like a basin of snow pouring down from the head, and even the weakened fingertips began to turn white. How could this be? She widened her eyes in disbelief. Look again, it's still like this. Suddenly panicked and lost. You, how could you? She didn't care if she was just a figurehead, she was eager to explore Lingxi Dantian. Ling Yan smiled gently as before and shook his head lightly, saying, "Don't look, Danfu. I'm just a damaged golden pill, much better than you. Is this not just a damage to the golden elixir?" Clearly. Danfu choked in her voice, unable to continue. Her stone brother, the golden pill, is clearly covered in cracks, almost shattering at a touch. Was it useless for her to sacrifice herself to block in front of that explosion back then? In the battle of the ancient battlefield, she and he were clearly the cannon fodder for both sides of the demon path. One fell into the realm of his divine soul struggling to survive, and the other shattered the golden pill, making it even more difficult to progress. Poor her stone brother. The naturally pure earth and gold twin spiritual roots, with superior qualifications, should have soared to the sky in one fell swoop, reaching the level of primordial infants and even transforming into gods. Surprisingly after all, it's still her father and daughter who can't resist him. She was both startled and painful, like the wind shaking a candle, her spirit flickering in a flash, almost instantly melting when blown up in one breath. Danfu. Ling Yan blurted out a shout. Thank you to the mountaineer for the recommended ticket from the owner of the lake hall. Your recognition is the driving force behind my writing. I will repay everyone with beautiful words. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Qingyun's Farewell to the Lord. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8 Qingyan's farewell to the Lord Ling Ting watched as Danfu's divine soul suddenly became ethereal and swayed. His heart tightened, but he didn't have time to feel sad. His hands followed suit and without thinking, he repeatedly practiced several well-practiced spells towards the opposite side. Fortunately, he came prepared. Ling Yan's right hand kept playing a series of complex tricks without stopping, and circles of halos scattered, merging into the virtual shadow. The divine soul in front of him immediately became clearer. He paused for a moment, then placed his left hand against his forehead, closed his eyes, and slowly pulled from the center of his eyebrows. His index finger pointed out a golden ball of light that shone brightly, and without hesitation, it entered the divine soul phantom in front of him. A halo shrank from the outside to the inside, until it reached a point the size of a soybean, and gradually merged into the phantom, which helped Danfu stabilize the divine soul. Watching the phantom of the woman across from him gradually stabilize and even solidify, he finally let out a soft sigh. "Brother Stone, why do you waste such a good thing for me again? You should take good care of yourself." Danfu looked at her stable soul shadow and felt sad instead of happy. "This Mani light is only compatible with you at the moment. I keep it, but it's just a waste. With the help of the Mani light, you can replenish your divine soul and reincarnate in this realm, which will also reduce some obstacles." Ling Yan only hates that he no longer has any useful treasures to help the person in front of him recover. He doesn't care that this is the Mani light that even Yuan Ying's superpower craves. Seeing that this action was effective, he felt a slight sense of relief in his heart, and his eyes unconsciously showed a sense of satisfaction. "Finally, I was able to make it in time. Without this Mani light, even if his Danfu were reincarnated, he would initially be just a demented child with incomplete spiritual soul. Although it can be repaired through the opportunity of maternal and fetal pregnancy, it will take 2 or 3 reincarnations to gradually improve and perfect. How dare he gouge out his heart for this? How unbearable!" Ling Yan extended his finger and gently traced the face of his beloved, with a small smile emanating from his mouth. "Please rest assured in this realm, don't worry about me. In addition to your second sister's orphan, I have also taken in a few disciples, all of whom are poor children implicated in the Dao Demon War and have good intentions. I now request to reside in Shaoqing Mountain for a long time, and I have disciples to serve me in everything, so that I can enjoy the rest of my life in peace." He is like this, always speaking lightly. She knew, however, that he had achieved so much and had such ambitions, but in the end, he succumbed to the small Shaoqing Mountain, helplessly counting the passing years and peacefully passing away. He must have experienced what kind of anger and despair, to finally end up feeling so disheartened and speak of such a light and carefree, enjoying the rest of his life. "Has Master Shanshin truly believed in you? How did Shankingshan sect treat you later? Have you invited a renowned doctor? How many words do you want to ask, but there's no need to ask again." Danfu leaned over with tears in her eyes, and Ling Yan let out a deep sigh. Finally, she no longer restrained herself and gently embraced the shadow into her arms. Danfu whispered, "Do you remember when we found a waterwood cultivation technique that said, if we could find a child like me with a water spirit root?" At this point, Danfu's heart was greatly troubled. She remembered that when she said these words, the two of them were deeply in love and regarded each other as their lifelong companions. How could he have thought of it? At that time, the moon was bright and the flowers were just right. What a beautiful scenery. In fact, what she wanted to say at the time was, "If we had a child with a water spirit root like me." However, she was really shy and forced to change her words to, "find a child with a water spirit root like me." At this moment, how could we not bring up this sentence again without hurting people's hearts? "If we find a child with a water spirit root," Danfu endured a sharp pain in her heart and repeated the words that had brought so many sweet dreams, then continued. "Just pass on this cultivation technique to her, and it would be even better to have a wooden spiritual root. This little girl happens to have a water and wood dual spiritual root, which is suitable for this technique. I have been watching her grow from a fetus to the present day, and I can't bear to see her die young. This matter is over, you don't have to worry about this world anymore. We are on a different path, so let's take her as our disciple. Ling Ting remained silent. If possible, even if it were for his endless cycle of suffering, she would rather forget about herself, the hard stone that betrayed her charm, and return to her once ignorant and radiant demeanor. Ling Yan turned his eyes to look at the sleeping little girl and nodded dejectedly. Suddenly, there was a loud sound of the pearl curtain, but a palace maid rushed in from outside, who was preparing to pick lotus leaves. She was about to board the small boat when she suddenly remembered that if the little princess woke up midway and didn't see herself by her side, would she remember the sad thing again? It would be better to change to a young palace maid to pick lotus leaves and still stay by her side. Picking pearls outside the water pavilion, I was surprised to see two young palace maids sleeping on the ground, unable to wake up, knowing that something had happened inside the pavilion. Fortunately, she had also experienced these years, and was actually a knowledgeable palace maid. So she tiptoed quietly towards the window and was listening to most of the indoor situation. Although she heard it in mist and didn't know what was going on, Kaiju understood that these two people were not extraordinary people and had no ill intentions. However, it seemed that they were planning to take the little princess away. In a hurry, he rushed in. Although the two of them have been practicing for many years indoors, they are very special at this time. Danfu was already only left with a remnant soul and lost all her divine powers. Ling Ling, on the other hand, is a severely injured person who travels across boundaries and has extremely limited spiritual awareness, far from being as sensitive as before. When he first arrived, he needed a sleeping spell and knocked down two young palace maids. With a rough scan of his divine sense, he only knew that there was no one nearby, and he was in this ordinary place, so he did not develop a sense of vigilance. When the old friends met, their emotions were stirred up, and various reasons gathered together, causing them to not notice anyone listening. Two immortals, I beg you, maidservants. Kaiju rushed in and knelt on the ground with a thud. The two people in front of him were obviously not ordinary people, like legendary immortals. She didn't know how to say it or how to request it, only to know that these two people in front of her had just said that the little princess was destined to die young, and these two people seemed to be a glimmer of hope for the little princess. Therefore, she bravely begged. Please, bless our little princess with a long life of 100 years. After finishing speaking, he repeatedly kowtowed his head. Ling Ting was originally a righteous cultivator who practiced more and had less experience in worldly affairs. He was also known for his kindness and softness, and was at a loss for this mortal woman. Danfu has been in this world for many years and is familiar with the people and things around the princess. She smiled and said, Do you know that if the little princess has a long life, she will have to leave this world forever, and then she will not be able to meet her relatives again? How could you allow me, the fake princess, to occupy her position? Just now, the fairy said that she will fulfill her filial piety on behalf of the princess. If the Empress and your Majesty learn that the little princess can recover and avoid premature death, even if she cannot be raised by her side, she will be willing. Without hesitation, Kaiju boldly looked up at Danfu and Ling Yan. If this immortal shows mercy, please take the servant to serve the little princess by her side, and there will be no complaints about being a cow, a horse, or a maid for the immortal. She paused, pursed her lips, and had a determined expression on her face. If the fairy is not convenient to bring the maidservant, as long as the princess can really increase her life, the maidservant will be willing to stay here to serve the new princess, and will not reveal any words to the outside world. Or, if the fairy is not at ease, just do something to make the maidservant's spirits disappear, and the maidservant will have no complaints. Danfu's eyes turned to Ling Xian, who was also looking towards her and said in a gloomy tone. When I came, I collected some faint nettles outside the two interfaces, and with my Qingyun barrier, I could barely protect these two people from leaving this realm. However, the power of the boundary stone can only help me break through the realm once, with no remaining strength. I know that being able to come once is already an extra favor from heaven. I really received a favor from this palace maid at that time. Unexpectedly, how could you bring that little girl doll alone? She is also considered a destined person. After this incident, you can take them back to the Qingkong realm. Danfu's eyes were full of sadness and lingering emotions. My stone brother. How much effort did he put into finding himself, and how much reluctance did he have, but ultimately, he couldn't continue his previous relationship. She has always been decisive in her actions, so there is no need to procrastinate. This life is over, and in the next life, don't meet again Brother Stone, knowing you once is not a waste of my life. Just, I'll never see you again. Kaiju didn't know what kind of grudges the two of them had, but only knew that they had agreed to accompany the little princess forever. After a big sigh of relief, I just went to the bed to hug the still sleeping little princess. A white mist appeared before my eyes, and I unconsciously fell asleep. I don't know how long it has been, but at some point, I have a vague sense of consciousness, as if I have gradually woken up from a long sleep, and it seems that I haven't fully regained consciousness after a deep sleep. Hunting with the sound of the wind in my ears, my body sways and sways. When that little bit of consciousness first woke up, Kaiju felt half asleep and half awake, as if she was in mid-air, as if her whole body was wrapped in numerous dark blue soft and resilient barriers. A group of faint stars occasionally flashed by, and I don't know how many huge black shadows had passed through. In the distance, there seemed to be a bright light welcoming. Suddenly, my mind cleared, and Kaiju seemed to wake up from a dream. Her first reaction was to hug her arms tightly, feeling that the little person that worried her the most was still warm in her arms. The familiar scent of a child reached her nose, and she finally breathed a sigh of relief. Suddenly, his body settled down, and there was a burst of light in front of him. The dark blue barrier around his body disappeared in a flash, and the immortal named Ling Ting was standing beside him. Picking pearls, disregarding her head and still feeling slightly dizzy, quickly looked around. As seen in my eyes, there is a sea and sky in front of me, the sky is as vast as the sky, and the sea is like soup. Behind me is a continuous green mountain, although there is no human habitation far or near, the mountain scenery is clear and beautiful, with clear vegetation and no sense of wilderness. The land is a good place, the scenery is a good scenery, but what about the good fairy world? Even though the atmosphere here is clear and spiritual, it clears the heart and soul. But shouldn't the dwelling place of immortals be Qiangli Yuyu or Yaoshu Xianpa? Kaiju suddenly felt a movement in her arms, but the little princess opened her eyes in a daze. The little girl rubbed her eyes with a hint of haziness, and her little head habitually rubbed against Saiju's embrace for a few moments. Suddenly, she froze, her drowsiness dissipated, and a pair of wonderful eyes opened wide, saying, "Kaiju auntie, where is this?" "Who are you?" he said, looking at Ling Yan in a daze. Picking pearls didn't know how to answer for a moment. Ling Yan had a gentle smile and reached out to gently touch the little girl's head. "Here is the Qingkong realm. I am your master." This chapter is 3,000 words, and the extra 1,000 words could have started another chapter, but for the sake of the completeness of the story, they were still put together. This way, the wedge has a head and a tail, coming and going. If you like my writing, and if you still have a recommendation ticket on hand, please support Caillou and move your fingers to put your work in a better state. New works require support, and I will definitely write this story well and not disappoint every ticket. Thank you. Also, these chapters are just introductory chapters. Good writing is slowly unfolding later. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Favorite World Bank. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Favorite World Bank. Second brother, hurry up. Aunt Lou's house is making rice cakes this afternoon. From afar, I could see several smoke rising in the Chisha village at the foot of the mountain. On the halfway slope, a little girl wearing a blue floral earthen cloth jacket jumped up in anger, waving and waving at the mountain with her arms. A head protruded from the stone cave more than 10 zhang above, and there was a young man in green clothes who was 18 or 19 years old. He saw the anxious expression on the little girl's face, and with a hee-hee smile, he spread his arms and stood up, landing steadily beside her like a falcon. "Don't worry, second brother will take you there now." The two of them held hands and exerted their strength together, flying down like a pair of big birds. Although they only demonstrated secular martial arts skills, their skills were remarkable. Although the little girl is only about the age of 10 and has a delicate appearance, she is extremely agile and follows her second brother for several consecutive ups and downs without any difficulty. In fact, she is very familiar with the roads up and down in the mountains, and the uncles and aunts in the village invite her to eat more often than a few brothers, but she is the youngest. My master said that every time she goes down the mountain in the past 2 years, she still needs her senior brother to accompany her. She also likes to find an older brother to accompany her when she goes down the mountain. Among the people who can accompany her today, the second brother is best to speak. I originally wanted to go down the mountain after lunch, but it was easy to get rid of my master and senior brother. Unexpectedly, my second brother said on the way that he wanted to take a look at the newly discovered mechanism inside the cave and see if it was the same as he had imagined. Even if it was exactly what I told him in the morning, it still delayed me for a while before leaving the cave. "Xiaojiu, isn't old Ba always with you? Why do you have to hold on to me today?" Usually, Xiaojiu and Lao Ba are inseparable, and it's rare for Xiaojiu to come down the mountain alone. It's really rare. The 8th brother was caught by the 7th brother and said he had to copy Shaoqing immortal records 3 times before releasing him. "Oh, I forgot, you guys caused trouble again. There's no such thing as." The little girl's tone was a bit vague. "I just went fishing and didn't tell everyone." "Really? How did I hear that old 7 still itches for several days?" Second brother asked with a smile. "How do I know? Maybe it's 7 brother." The little girl's tone became even more vague, wanting to say, maybe 7th brother didn't take a good shower. However, considering 7th brother's serious and tidy cleanliness, it was really impossible for him to speak without conscience. Quickly shift the topic. "Second brother, you know that 8th brother is most afraid of plagiarism from Taoist scriptures. It takes so long to delay cultivation. Good second brother, tomorrow you can help me plead for 7th brother's love. Let's copy it for 2 days first." Xiaojiu begged him, but he usually couldn't bear to refuse. However, Lao Qi was a bit angry this time, and the second brother who was in a dilemma had to respond vaguely. He thought for a moment and then advised little 9's sister, who was still worried about Lao Ba, to "Xiaojiu, don't worry, Lao Qi also has a number. Also, you need to think positively." This time, he only copied the Shaoqing immortal records. Think about it, last time Lao Qi asked him to copy the Shangqing immortal records, which was several times thicker. It took almost 2 months to copy it. If Lao Qi remembered that there was also Qingkong immortal history, it would be years before he could finish copying it. Okay. The little girl pouted and looked helpless. Octopus and Chiga are obviously twins, but their personalities are so different. Octopus jumps off like a monkey, while Chiga is like an old mountain eagle. Master and several senior brothers can't control Octopus, and Chiga can pull him down from the tree with just one glance. Although she is not afraid of this 7th brother, she still prefers to walk around him in her daily life. However, the only one willing to go up and down the mountains and seas with her is often the 8th brother. Every time the two of them dig out an eagle's nest or something, the master doesn't say anything. The 7th brother's gaze just makes people feel like a cold wind blowing behind their necks. Without a few idle words, the two of them were already close to the foot of the mountain. Looking at the 10 or so zhang mountain slope below, Xiaojiu placed a pair of small hands on Urge's hands and said, "Come on." Ergu exerted a slight force and skillfully lifted Xiaojiu upside down, his hands lifting him above his head. With 4 hands touching each other, Xiaojiu's 2 thin arms steadily supported each other. The second brother secretly used his spiritual power to shake, his arms slightly retracted and straightened, but the little person in his hand did not shake at all. I've made progress. He was very satisfied in his heart, looked up, and his small face was smiling at him with white teeth. The two of them looked at each other, and the second brother smiled knowingly before shouting, "Come on." Before he could finish speaking, he slightly retracted his arms and vigorously threw them upwards. Xiaojiu quickly popped out, and the small figure flew into the air with the help of force. After reaching the highest point, it happily flipped 2 somersaults and drew a beautiful arc, like a swallow throwing into the forest towards the village below. The joyful screams spread all the way. Even though I can jump off the mountaintop myself. The second brother who threw the person out shook his head, but the smile at the corner of his mouth couldn't be suppressed, with a hint of helplessness and willingness. He looked in the direction where Xiaojiu had fallen, and it was safe to reach the ground. He turned around and took a few steps, leaped forward, and returned to the cave to continue pondering. At the foot of the mountain, in a small village, in a small courtyard of a farmhouse, 2 children are eagerly looking forward to the continuous obstacles of Shaoqing Mountain not far away. When they saw a black shadow in the distance flying with laughter, the 2 little children immediately jumped up and said, "Sister Xiaojiu, Sister Xiaojiu." The young flower girl was full of admiration on her face, with her mouth half open. In her eyes, little Nine's sister, dressed in sunshine, gracefully descended from the sky, exuding an extremely imposing aura. A slightly larger one was the older brother's roller, who vigorously shook the wooden pestle in his hand and greeted Xiaojiu with an excited expression. As soon as Xiaojiu landed, the roller rushed up and held up the wooden pestle in his hand, saying, "Sister Xiaojiu, look, I'm watching my mother's pestle. I told her to wait for you to come before starting making rice cakes." The kitchen door creaked open, and Nanzhan Yang grabbed the pestle with a smile and scolding, saying, "Don't give it to me yet. I promised you early in the morning. I'll wait for your little Nine sister to come before making rice cakes. This damn child just doesn't believe it." The Nianzi saw her nodding and then released her hand. The Nianzi finally grabbed the wooden pestle. She was very angry and wiped her son's nose with white glutinous rice noodles. She turned her head and pulled Xiaojiu's hand with a smile. "Xiaojiu, your Uncle Lu and Aunt Lu have been waiting for you all along. The white glutinous rice harvested this year is particularly good." His father brought back a purple-black glutinous rice from the previous miller, saying it is even more fragrant than white rice. Xiaojiu chuckled and shouted, "Aunt Lu," regardless of whether Aunt Lu was still covered in powder on one hand. He picked up Aunt Lu's hand and held on to Hua Mei with the other. As soon as the roller saw that it had fallen off the list, he quickly ran up and grabbed Hua Mei's empty hand. The 4 of them, big and small, formed a long string and walked inside. A string of people, big and small, tall and short, couldn't keep up with each other. As a result, you held me, I tripped you, and I had to walk slowly towards the kitchen, squeezing and squeezing each other. There were a few black footprints on the shoe, but no one cared, just chattering away. The first volume is actually just a preface, so it is relatively short. I originally intended to name it after the preface, and the subsequent volume was designated as the first volume, but it cannot be operated within the framework of the starting point. The second volume just started the main text, it won't end in just a few chapters. The content plan is that this volume will have at least 200 chapters. The author does not want the protagonist to start alone like in previous immortal texts, then learn from her master, engage in intrigue, obtain secret immortal tools and even magical spaces, and reach the pinnacle. I want to tell a story about the growth of a female protagonist. She has loved ones, a warm childhood, a less boring and quiet path of cultivation, and her own exploration and new knowledge. Of course, there may also be painful wounds, twists and turns, and even repeated setbacks. Cultivation is like life, and no one is wise, calm, and calculating from the beginning. To experience falling and getting up, and to slowly refine one's heart over the long years, one can have a wise understanding of the big picture in mind. This is the story I want to tell. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Immortals on the Mountain. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. Immortals on the mountain. In the kitchen, the glutinous rice has been ground into powder. The snow-white rice noodles are piled up like a hill in the big basket. There is also a small black rice noodles with a light smell of rice. Standing next to the millstone stood the miller father, an extremely capable young man deftly tidying up the scattered grains of rice. Xiao Jiu casually called out Uncle Lu and nodded with a smile. She ran happily to Mishan, and for some reason, she loved the fragrance of this kind of rice noodles. Master and several senior brothers all joked about Xiao Jiu. There is only this precious little girl on Shaoqing Mountain. If there is anything delicious to eat, do it for her first. When will she come hungry? The spiritual fruits in the master's backyard, the birds and animals caught by the senior brother in the deep mountains, the fresh vegetables and game often brought by the farmers at the foot of the mountain, and the precious taste of the sea on the other side of the mountain, she didn't know how much she had eaten. But every time before the Chinese New Year, when the village at the foot of the mountain starts preparing cakes for the festival, she greedily runs down the mountain. Since we entered the month of December, we have been preoccupied with our lessons. We just wondered who was steaming mantu today, and who would be eating rice cakes tomorrow. So we ran down the mountain with Mina when we were free. Shaoqing Mountain is located at the southeast end of East Chuzhou, with the sea on one side and the Qisha village at the foot of the other mountain. In the early years, there was a scholar surnamed Lu who, in order to avoid war, led his clan to migrate to this place. When he moved, there were only 7 local households at the foot of the mountain, hence the name, Qisha village. After settling down, the Lu surname settled down here and settled down to work in agriculture. They couldn't help but marry someone from another surname and gradually prospered, forming this small settlement. The times have changed, and Qisha village has already merged with the Lu family, with over 100 households. However, the name, Qisha, has not been changed, which is also the meaning of the ancestors of this place. This place has beautiful mountains and rivers, abundant resources, and no worries about livelihood. The people's customs are also simple. Due to the emergence of great Confucian scholars in our ancestors, although many later generations made a living by farming and hunting, they also practiced calligraphy and etiquette. Everyone has a touch of elegance and is very knowledgeable and reasonable. The villagers have passed it down for generations. When our ancestors settled here, they were guided by immortals. The main peak of Shaoqing Mountain, Ningbi Peak, is often guarded by immortals, but it has always been a legend, with almost no trace of immortals. Moreover, ordinary people have always revered immortals, and there are many wild beasts in the mountains, so they do not dare to venture too deep into the mountains. Hunting and picking activities have always only revolved around the outskirts of the mountains. However, in recent decades, these newly arrived immortals on the mountain have been different from the legendary Gao Leng immortals in their ancestors. They are extremely ordinary and kind-hearted, and many farmers in the village are protected by their masters and disciples. They get along very well both on and off the mountain. Although Master Ling Xianchang doesn't often come down the mountain, he is very friendly when he meets him occasionally. Sometimes he meets hunters in the mountain and even gives some guidance. The disciple is never arrogant, and several disciples usually help villagers drive away wild beasts, clear mountain roads, especially rescue the injured and assist the elderly. They are as enthusiastic as their neighbors' youth. The villagers themselves are also very aware of propriety and never seek things they should not have. Both on and off the mountain know each other's good intentions, so the villagers do not try to please each other, and the master and disciple show no signs of kindness, fearless or flattering, so they naturally get closer together. The villagers at the foot of the mountain never forget to greet their siblings, especially Xiaojiu, when they receive good things. A beautiful little girl who can beat wild beasts and pull carrots. She can teach the children in the village some self-defense skills that are very useful. She can help the villagers pick rare herbs from the cliffs that ordinary people cannot climb, and she can also do odd jobs and chat with her aunts. Aunt Lu sewed a small earthen cloth coat, and she was able to put it on without hesitation, so everyone loved her very much. Xiao Jiu has always felt deeply regretful that his master and senior brothers are a bit lacking in heart and mind in their cultivation. How could they not understand the intentions of their uncles and aunts so well? Villagers sometimes invite their masters and senior brothers to dinner, and they often politely reply with, "Thank you." 9 out of 10 times, they don't come down the mountain. Fortunately, I still have some thoughtfulness in my junior year, which finally did not disappoint Aunt Lu and others. How disappointed Aunt Lu and the others would be if you didn't open up your appetite with such sincerity when they treated you so sincerely. Therefore, Xiaojiu not only arrives at the invitation, but also sometimes takes his octopus to come uninvited, walking from the village head to the village end, not eating, holding on and not returning to the mountain. Especially when making rice cakes, she must start from grinding rice noodles to participate in every link. After grinding rice noodles, she must also steam rice noodles, until the rice cakes are beaten soft, until finally the rice cakes are shaped, cut into long strips, and do it herself. To the extent of her devotion, Shifu and elder martial brothers all think that if Xiaojiu had been so diligent in practicing kung fu, she would have been more successful than several elder martial brothers with her rare lucid constitution. Despite saying so, her master and senior brothers never put in any strong pressure on her. My master always patted her head and said helplessly, "Little Jiu, if you put in more effort, you would have been stronger than your senior brothers long ago." Senior brother Shi Yan was a bit nagging, and only worked hard to encourage her for a few days. Second senior brother Rusong has set up a mechanism on the puppet to accompany her in practice. When she makes progress in her martial arts, she will be ecstatic. A handful of flowers will bloom on her chest. She couldn't help but put in more effort in practicing. Third senior brother Yunqing will show off an interesting spell to lure her to learn, while sixth senior brother Mingyan often promises to go to the deep valley to pick a delicious spiritual fruit for her as a reward. Senior brother Qi has the least amount of knowledge and skills, but seeing her practice well makes it rare for her to show a smile. She turns her head and scolds her younger brother, Lao Ba, saying, "Why aren't you as ambitious as Xiaojiu?" "Brother Ba, it's the best." Beige Shoshuan is only 1 year older than Xiaojiu, and he is the most compatible with her. He dug out the nest of the white-winged eagle and snatched the honey of the earth shield bear, all of which were her good helpers who came to her as she called out. The best part is that if they win, the two will share the benefits of the battle, exchange their favorite moves without hiding anything, and then plan the next more difficult action. If unfortunately you come back with a disheveled face and fail, analyze the reasons for your failure together and strive to secure your next victory. Unfortunately, she has been busy lately. Since the winter solstice, her master has instructed her to go to the mountain to practice the technique of breathing for half an hour every morning. On the day of the winter solstice, the first sun gradually rises, and she needs to absorb more of the energy of yang in harmony. After breakfast, I also have to learn spells from my master or senior brother. After lunch, I have to recite Taoist scriptures with my third senior brother, and then go to the martial arts arena to practice new spells. It's really busy. Of course, it was not her who suffered even more, but the octopus. "Sister Jior, where's the 8th brother? Why hasn't the 8th brother come down?" Nianzi was overjoyed and remembered Shoshuan, who was inseparable from Sister Jior. He also followed suit and called him Ba Gu. Octopus. Hua Mei muttered along, learning to speak. "That's right, why didn't Shoshuan come? Last time he asked me to make him a osmanthus-filled rice cake." Aunt Lu patted the white rice noodles on her body and asked questions. "I thought about it for a moment, but I can't make rice cakes with filling." When I asked Aunt Li and the others, they all said that rice cakes don't have this kind of flavor. I could give him a portion coated with osmanthus honey, would you take a look? It must have been Taobao. Uncle Lu was very certain because he knew it well. Shoshuan looks like a fairy child, with skin that cannot compare to the three tigers. Ling Xianchang easily doesn't punish people. Xiao Jiu grinned and nodded randomly at Uncle Lu and Aunt Lu, both acknowledging Uncle Lu's words and Aunt Lu's osmanthus cake. The first volume is actually just a preface, so it is relatively short. I originally intended to name it after the preface, and the subsequent volume was designated as the first volume, but it cannot be operated within the framework of the starting point. The second volume just started the main text, it won't end in just a few chapters. The content plan is that this volume will have at least 200 chapters. The author does not want the protagonist to start alone like in previous immortal texts, then learn from her master, engage in intrigue, obtain secret immortal tools and even magical spaces, and reach the pinnacle. I want to tell a story about the growth of a female protagonist. She has loved ones, a warm childhood, a less boring and quiet path of cultivation, and her own exploration and new knowledge. Of course, there may also be painful wounds, twists and turns, and even repeated setbacks. Cultivation is like life, and no one is wise, calm, and calculating from the beginning. To experience falling and getting up, and to slowly refine one's heart over the long years, one can have a wise understanding of the big picture in mind. This is the story I want to tell. End of this chapter.